So they get me ready for surgery. They wheel me down the hall and they burst open the surgical doors and they slide me over onto the surgical table. It was freezing cold in there. I'll never forget that. And as they lay me down on the surgical table, I look to my right and Jesus walks into the room. And he walks in and he looks at me and he holds out his hand and he says, "I want to answer your prayer."
Mike, thank you so much for coming on Sips of Grace today. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Really glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so I saw your story on YouTube. It was several months ago now and was really touched by it. And so to start, could you take us back to a little bit before the incident that you had, the near-death experience, and tell us about what your life was like at that time?
Well, at that time, this actually happened like 20 years ago. It's just a story that God just won't let go. He keeps bringing it up, and we just make these big strides every time he throws it back in my face. Um, I went to my son's wedding. It was about 5 hours away from my house. It was out of town. We took about 4 days. We thought, the wedding's on Saturday. We'll get there on a Wednesday. At the time, he was my oldest son getting married. He lived down in Ventura in Santa Barbara area. And we were up in Manteca. So like I said, 5 hours away. And we were, like, he had been moved out for a while. He'd gone to college. He'd met a girl in college and they finally set a date and got married. I have 3 other kids too, all athletic. So they brought their baseball bats and their wiffle balls with them, and to the wedding. And we kind of made it a little vacation. And so we get down there on a Wednesday. We played baseball in the park. I had a great time. Weather was perfect. Um, we that night, Wednesday night, I kind of started feeling a little bit sick because I thought maybe I'm getting the flu. Thursday, I got sicker. Friday, we had the rehearsal dinner. I got even sicker. And by then I'm running a pretty good fever. And then Saturday, we go to the wedding, and Saturday, we got all the way through the wedding. Everything was fine, but I was still really sick. By then, I'm sweating, and I'm thinking something's wrong. This is more than the flu. And my son, who was in the medical field, the one that was getting married, he said, you better go get checked out because you could have a blockage or, something. And he asked me, he said, "Have you had your appendix out?" And I said, "Well, no, but it's not my appendix. I think it's just the flu." And he says, "Well, you should get checked out." So after the wedding, they all took off for her parents' house. They have this beautiful house, 3-story house overlooking the ocean. They took all the presents over there, and my son says, "Why don't you come with us?" And I said, "Guys, I got to go to the hospital and get checked out." At this point, I'm getting pretty worried that something serious could be wrong because this was, I've been feeling bad. This is the 4th day. So I ended up going to the emergency room. And of course, Saturday night, it's packed. I had to sit in the emergency room for, I think, a little over an hour before I even saw a triage nurse. She gets me back into the triage area. She lays me down and she's kind of poking around on my appendix. And she says, on my abdomen, she says, "It sounds like your appendix." And she said, and I said, here I'm arguing with the nurse. I said, "No, it's just the flu. Just give me something. I'll go home." And my wife's giving me these looks like, "Shut up, you big dummy. You're going to listen to what she has to say and she's going to figure it out." So she lays me down and she, as she's pushing on my abdomen, she's asking if that hurts. And I said, "No, it doesn't." And then she takes out this little rubber mallet and she taps the bottom of my feet. And and again, she says, "Does that hurt?" And I kind of laughed. I said, "No, of course not. It's, my stomach hurts, not my feet." And she tapped the other foot, the bottom of the other foot. And man, it sent pain into my abdomen. I screamed. And she says, "Okay, that's your appendix. It sounds like they've probably ruptured." She goes, "Have you done any physical activity lately in the last couple of days?" And I said, "Well, I played a lot of baseball with my kids in the park on Wednesday." And she, like, her expression just changed. She goes, "Wednesday?" And she's thinking Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. This is 3 days after. And she goes, well, if your appendix ruptured on Wednesday, we got to get in there quick. And she said that that would explain why, you're having a high fever. She says, I'm going to call in a surgeon. So the surgeon comes in probably about half an hour later. He got there pretty quick. And he looks at my blood test. They had taken some blood. And he says, yeah, your white blood cell count's really high. So that means you've got a pretty good infection going on there. He said, the only way I'm going to know is, once we get inside and figure out what's going on. But he said, I'm just going to figure that your appendix have ruptured. He says, if they haven't ruptured, you'll be here for a day or two. If they have ruptured, you'll probably be here for 3 or 4 days. And, we're out of town. We're 5 hours from home. The kids start school on Tuesday. This is Saturday night, probably Sunday morning by then. And so we're going, logistics. How are we getting the kids home? What are we going to do? Grandma and grandpas are both here. So we split the kids up, sent them home. So they get me ready for surgery. They wheel me down the hall and they burst open the surgical doors and they slide me over onto the surgical table. It was freezing cold in there. I'll never forget that. But I had a fever. They said it was 104 and I'm sweating. And as they lay me down on the surgical table, I look to my right and Jesus walks into the room like a physical person. It was the most bizarre thing. And then everything else just sort of disappeared. And he walks in and he looks at me and he holds out his hand and he says, I want to answer your prayer. And I'm just like, what is going on? My prayer, I remember telling my wife everything would be okay. Jesus is holding out his hand. I mean, I'm thinking I must have died. I mean, because Jesus is here. And I don't remember praying that I would die. I remember saying, Lord, take care of my kids and that kind of thing. I mean, I wasn't a, little background on me. I wasn't a really strong Christian Jesus follower. I knew who God was. I knew who Jesus was. I knew all that stuff. We attended a church, but that was more for just, getting the kids involved in church. I wasn't a real strong Christian. And now here's Jesus holding out his hand. And I'm thinking, yeah, I must be dead. So, and again, I'm thinking in, my rational mind, like what's going on here? What should I do? If I take his hand and I go to heaven, that's it. And I thought, man, I didn't get to say goodbye to my kids. I mean, if I'd known I was going to die, I would have hugged them forever. But that didn't happen. I just remember saying, I'll be fine, guys. Everything's great. But then what am I going to do? Tell Jesus no? So I grab his hand. And as soon as I touched his hand, we were standing on a mountain and everything in front of me was white, like the whitest white I've ever seen. I looked down at my feet and I'm still in a hospital gown. My feet are touching this beautiful green grass and perfectly manicured, but not mowed. It was just perfect. And my senses were heightened to the point where I could count every blade of grass. I knew exactly how many blades of grass were touching my feet. It was amazing. And the color was just spectacular. But everything else around me was like this brightest white, blinding white. And then my eyes start getting used to the white. And I noticed that there's like this shimmering ball, like kind of off to my right, about eye level. And it almost looked like light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm thinking, well, I'm dead. Because everybody says they go to the light at the end of the tunnel, right? And you get swept into this whatever. But it didn't like suck me in. It was just there. And pretty soon it starts sending out like these fluorescent light tubes, like 2 feet long, a little bit fatter than fluorescent tubes. And they start going all around me, like kind of slow at first. And one of them's coming right at my head. It hits me right here. And I kind of panicked, like, what do I do? Should I try and dodge this thing? And it ended up hitting me in the head. As it goes through me, it makes this little light buzzing sound, and it warmed me right down to my toes. It was amazing. It was just a great feeling. Like it warmed me completely. And now all of a sudden, when I look back at that, where those things were coming from, because everything's still white, I see it's like somebody pulls the white that's in front of me. It's like it becomes this curtain and it just gets pulled from my right to my left. And as it opens up, it opens up to this beautiful scenery of there's a city below me. I am standing on a mountain. Below the grass, there's like these beautiful little sweet peas, like it, they're flowers, but they're kind of like dancing. It looked like they were moving in the wind, but there's no wind. That mountain goes down to a city in a valley. And the city is huge, but now the fog or the curtain or veil or whatever it was that was so bright is now settled in that valley. So all I can see sticking out from the clouds or whatever is rooftops of this great big city. And most of the city rooftops, there were a lot of them were pointed that were sticking through, like almost like church steeples, and they were white. There were a few gold ones, and there was like almost right in the middle, there was this great big, it looked like a Capitol dome, and it was gold. And there were a few other smaller gold Capitol domes around, but the one in the middle was like huge. And the one thing that I noticed about the church steeples, like church steeples here, we have crosses on the top. There were no crosses on the top of the church steeples. I thought that was kind of odd. And then on the other side of that valley, there's another mountain that goes up, like in front of me, and it's a huge mountain. And it's covered in these, they look like pine trees, but they have like very dainty needles on them. And now those light beams, those fluorescent tube things, are going across the valley, going over the city, and one of them hits the tip of one of those trees, the branches, and it's like it had a diamond on it or some kind of a prism, because when it hit the tree, the tip, it just burst into like hundreds of tiny little light beams. And so it's like white fireworks going off everywhere over the city. And pretty soon it's like the whole sky is covered in that. And the sky above the trees is the most amazing color. Like it's like the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen, but there was no sun. So there's reds and like really super vivid colors, reds and blues and purples and oranges and yellows. And it was just amazing. I just remember looking at that thinking, wow, this is incredible. And then the white fireworks going off everywhere. It was unbelievable. And I remember looking back at where those light beams were coming from. And when I did, Jesus says to me, it's the glory of the Lord. And when he said that, I was overcome with emotion. I got so weak in my knees that I fell to my knees. I couldn't even stand. And when my knees hit the ground, they shocked me and they brought me back. At the instant my knees hit the ground, I feel this boom and I open my eyes. And now that whole beautiful scene is replaced by a doctor leaning over me wearing a mask. And he says, do you know your name? And I answered him in my mind. I said, Mike. And then he asks me again, do you know your name? And I realized that I didn't verbalize. So I said, Mike. And it was hard to talk because my throat was really dry. And he says, oh, good. Do you know where you are? And the city that the hospital was in was Ventura, but I had to think about it for a minute. I thought, well, let's see. I was at my son's wedding. Oh yeah, I'm having surgery. And then I thought, where's Jesus? And then I thought, yeah, I'm in Ventura. I got to be in Ventura because there's a doctor here. So I said, Ventura. And he says, okay. And he kind of pats me on the leg and he says, he's back. And he says that to people in the room. And then I realized there's like 5 or 6 other people all wearing scrubs. They all looking at me like they're really concerned. And I see one of them is putting back this crash cart, the paddles. One of them was kind of laying down and she's putting it on the crash cart and she zips it by me and goes out of the room. And he says to one of the other people, let's get him up to ICU. So I ended up spending 12 days in the hospital. And the funny thing about that whole experience is, I guess it's not really funny, but there's a whole second part that I have only started telling. I think I've told 2 people since it happened. And I can tell you why I had to stop telling the second half. After I got home, I sat down on the couch with some friends. They would come over and see me and see how I'm doing. First time I got home from the hospital. I spent 12 days in the hospital. I developed an abscess. I was battling pneumonia. I mean, I was a mess. The surgeon came to see me the next day. He actually said, yours is the worst case I've ever seen. And I was like, really? And this is a 70-year-old man that operated on me. And he says, yeah. And he starts walking away after he examined, stitches and all that. And he comes back and he says, well, I said it was the worst case I've ever seen, but that's not exactly true. Yours is the worst case I've ever seen where the patient lived. And he said, you shouldn't be here. And then I'll never forget what he said. He says, God is not done with you yet. Pretty incredible. So the second part, let me get to that. Jesus came back 24 hours later while I was battling pneumonia. He entered the hospital room where I was in ICU. There was a nurse sitting there. I, and this is the part that's so hard to believe, that when I sat down on the couch to tell my friends, I would tell them the whole NDE story, and I'm crying through the whole thing. It's still 20 years later, it still chokes me up because, I'm right back there reliving it. So, a couple of my friends came over, and as I'm telling them, they're crying along with me. These are 40-year-old men holding my hand, crying while I'm telling the NDE story. And when I get to the part where I say, yeah, and Jesus came back 24 hours later, he came into my hospital room, their expression, every single one of them, when I told them that story, every single one of them went from, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing, to, dude, you're crazy. I mean, yeah, they just, or something about it that they just thought, that, and I remember thinking, Lord, how am I going to get past this? People think I'm nuts. I'm losing credibility here. I mean, I know what happened. I know what I went through. And after about the sixth person that I told, I heard Jesus say in the same voice when he said, I want to answer your prayer. He says to me, and he whispers it in my ear, audibly whispers it. He says, you don't have to tell this part yet. And I thought, okay, thank you. Because I don't want to tell this part. I'd rather just let that part go. And then after I started telling this whole story on YouTube, you said you saw one of the interviews. I was reading one of the comments, and everybody has their own idea of why this happened. The ND, well, it was, DMT, it's your dying brain. It's medication, which they're like, when I went in for surgery, they didn't even put the mask on me yet. And that's when Jesus showed up. I had nothing, but the electrolytes or whatever they give you. They didn't give me as the anesthesiologist told me, you don't get the happy juice yet. So I wasn't on drugs. So I knew that. But one of the theories that I came up against was, everybody said, well, you had a high fever, so you had a hallucination. And I thought, well, yeah, I mean, you can get hallucinations from high fever. But here's the funny part. When Jesus came back to the hospital room 24 hours later, and I'll get to that part real quick, but I was packed in ice because I was battling pneumonia. And I had a 3-hour conversation with him. And it was just like me and you talking. Like, he's talking out loud, I'm talking out loud. The nurse is not hearing anything. And at one point, after I had a 1-hour conversation, she checks my temperature and she says, oh, that's great, you're down to 100. Now, 100 degrees is not enough to produce a hallucination, but I still talked to him for another 2 hours. And I wasn't on medication. I had some painkillers, but nothing that would create this interaction. So the conversation started like this. Like, I woke up 24 hours after surgery, and I'm laying in ICU, and there was no nurse in there, but they had given me the little call button. They laid it on my chest because I was so weak I couldn't even pick my hands up off my chest. So they put it on my chest, and I wake up and I couldn't breathe. I mean, I was really struggling to breathe. I had like, it felt like there was like water vapor on my lungs, and I was just really like I was underwater. And so I panicked. It was 2 a.m. I called for the nurse, and she comes in and she puts the stethoscope on my chest, and she looks at me, and after she listens a minute, I'll never forget her words. She said, "Oh, honey, you're developing pneumonia." And at the time, I thought, "Oh my gosh, I'm not gonna die. I'm not gonna make it," because that's why Jesus showed me heaven, because he wanted me to be at ease when I die, that I know where I'm going. But it turns out he had other plans. Um, so she calls in like three other nurses. They packed me in ice. They had this ice blanket. They put it over my whole body because I was still at 104 temperature. They gave me oxygen, so they strapped some oxygen under my nose, so I had oxygen going straight in there. And then they gave me this little spirometer to breathe into, and it's this tube where you blow into it, and you got to move this little marble up, And she says, "I want you to do this 10 times an hour." So she kind of props it up on my chest. She puts it in my lips so that I'm so weak. She says, "Try and blow and make that little marble move." So I'm looking at it, and I blow, and I can barely breathe, let alone blow. Of course, the little marble didn't move at all. And she says, "I want you to do that. Keep doing it. And I'm going to sit here and remind you." So all the nurses leave except for the one. She pulls up a chair and she sits at the end of my bed. And then I, I feel a holy presence enter the room. I can't even describe it. It's like there were little twinkling stars. And I just knew that Jesus was back. And I hear him say, "Michael." And I'm looking around and I don't see anybody. I'm expecting to see like the physical Jesus, like what I saw, in the operating room. And I don't see anybody. And I looked at the nurse and I said, "Did you say something?" And she goes, "No." And she says, "Why don't you try and breathe into the spirometer again?" So I do. And I'm kind of looking around like, okay, what's going on here? The whole atmosphere was different in the room. And he says again, "Michael." And I said, "Is that you, Jesus?" And he says, "Yes." And I look at the nurse like, because I'm talking out loud. She didn't even move. She didn't hear me at all. She didn't hear him. And I thought, man, this is really weird. Uh, but he says, "I had to get you flat on your back, away from all the distractions, so that you could hear me." And I was like, what? What's going on here? So I have this 3-hour conversation, and probably 2 hours of it, everybody wants to know now, well, what did Jesus say? I think 2 hours of it was me saying, "Is this really happening? Are you really here? Come on, Jesus, what is this?" And he kept saying yes. I asked him so many times, he started getting annoyed. I could just tell by the way he answered me. Yes, it's real. I'm here. And he said, "I want more from you." And I'm like, "Well, me?" At the time I was a superintendent for a real estate development company. I had a really stressful job. I had like 30 to 35 houses in different stages of construction that I had to walk through every day, make sure that the contractors were there, make sure that they were following the blueprints. I had to inspect everything. I had to deal with, city inspectors coming through all the time. I mean, just, customers saying, "Hey, this doesn't look right," or, we do frame walks, and it was so stressful. And he says, "I had to get you flat on your back so that you could hear me." And I realized that I couldn't hear, I couldn't hear Jesus, before this happened, because I had so much going on. I was coaching little league and all kinds of baseball teams. I started a youth football team. I was just so busy and so stressed out from the work and all my volunteering after work, and that I didn't have time for God. We went to church on Sunday morning. That was about it. But didn't really mean anything to me. And he says to me, "I want more from you." And so I finally said, "Okay, well, what? What do you want from me?" I have no idea. And he never answered me. But he did say, I do want you to tell our story." He always called it our story. And I said, well, what does that look like? I mean, do you want me to write a book? Because back 20 years ago, YouTube was just full of music videos.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a it wasn't a whole lot there. It certainly wasn't NDEs and sharing. And he says, well, basically just follow my lead, be open to hearing my voice, which I hear his voice a lot now, even more so than like when I first got out of the hospital. But I hear his audible voice all the time. Um, he did tell me that, and there was nothing prophetic that had to do with the world. He didn't say the world's going to end in 20 years, or, he didn't say anything like that. Go back and tell mankind this. It was pretty much just, listen, you've got some valleys to walk through, and just know that I've approved what you're going to go through, and I will be with you. So lean on me, but be open to hearing from the Holy Spirit. And so, and he did say, read your Bible more, because that's how I talk to you, and and listen for my voice. He did also say that our story is going to reach millions, and I laughed. I mean, I flat out laughed. I said, no. You got the wrong guy. I'm not Billy Graham. He's the guy that talks to millions. I don't like talking to more than 5 people at a time. I'm very uncomfortable talking to crowds. I don't want to do that. And he's like, well, you will. You know, when you do these things, the Holy Spirit will talk for you. Just be open to listening for that voice. And I thought he was crazy. Millions, come on. And so I kept asking him, should I write a book? And he never answered me about writing a book. So here I am reading one of the comments that said something about, and this was just like within the last probably 7 or 8 months. I'm reading one of the comments that said it was your NDE was caused by a hallucination because of your high fever. And when I read that particular comment, and I've read that before, but this one particular comment, I hear God say, or Jesus, God, right? He says, now's the time to tell your story. I want you to tell the whole story. The world is ready, and so are you. And I was kind of blown away by that. And I thought, he did change me since the NDE. I mean, it took a long time because I was not uh, a real good representative of Jesus. I mean, I worked in the construction field. There's a lot of rough characters out there, and you gotta sometimes get in their face and say, listen, you're gonna do this whether you like it or not. Um, you know, and that's the way construction was. They all knew I was a Christian, but I was just a Christian. I didn't live it. And so he changed me. He molded me to the point where when I read that comment and he said that, I thought, I just need to pray for that person, because I want them to come to the truth, you know? And so I thought, okay, now's the time. So I ended up writing another book. I wrote one that was fiction, that was kind of fun, that looked at, like if heaven could be a physical place right now. And that was kind of interesting. And I incorporated my real life NDE in that. And then, I mentioned the story that God won't let it die. So that book came out 8 years after my NDE. And then 10 years after that, believe it or not, this is 18 years after the NDE, Guidepost called me and they wanted to put my story in. Um, there's a book called Glimpses of Eternity in the Witnessing Heaven series. And so they had their author call me, and we emailed and talked and for a couple months. And that was when I was working on my last house, renovating my last house. And so they published that. And then as a result of that, I was watching some Christian YouTube channels. And then, people started talking about NDEs. And I was watching this one, and I heard Jesus say to me, I want you to contact this man. And I was watching one of this preacher. He was in Florida, and I looked up who was putting the podcast on, and I sent him a note, or an email, and I said, I had this near death experience. I don't know if you're interested in that. Like within an hour, he called me. And within 2 weeks, I was in his office and we were doing a podcast. And it sort of all blew up from there. So Jesus was right. He wants everybody to know. And and as a result of all of that, I became a real disciple of Jesus. And, I wear my faith on my sleeve now. So, back then I was like, if somebody asked me and pushed me, yeah, I'm a Christian. But now I'm like, that's the most important thing in my life. And I think that I guess that would be my message to everybody. Just be bold in your faith. Don't be afraid. I mean, the one other thing that Jesus said to me in the hospital was, when you step out in faith, the enemy steps up his attack. And it's absolutely true because, I've been called, you know, uh, people have called me a servant of the devil himself because I'm being deceived, but I always say, well, listen, God gets the glory. The Father gets the glory, not me. And if I can just be a mustard seed in somebody's life to point them to Jesus, that's my whole purpose now.
Amen. Praise God. That's
Yeah.
amazing. So I have lots of questions. I'm sure people are going to want to know, what did Jesus look like?
Jesus looked very different than what I had pictured him. As a kid growing up in North America, I grew up in California. I was always shown a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus with white skin, like me. When he walked in, he had much darker skin than I thought. His eyes were a bluish green, more green than blue, very striking. He had a short beard. He had dark brown hair, wavy hair, about down just past his shoulders, and he was wearing a white robe. And people have asked me, like, when you took his hand, did you feel his scars? And no, I didn't. But actually, it's kind of funny because this one lady, when I was doing a book signing for my first book, she asked me if I felt his scars when I touched his hand. And I'd never been asked that before. And I thought, no, I didn't. I'm sure I would have noticed. And she says, well, I don't believe you then. It didn't really happen. You didn't, if you didn't feel the scars, then you didn't know who Jesus was. And I did a little investigating, like, yeah, it's in his
Yeah.
wrist.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you
Hmm.
put it in your hand, you're just going to fall off the cross. And that's not the purpose of that kind of a death. It was a brutal death. So yeah. So that was just part of the journey, I guess.
Yeah. Interesting. And then you just immediately knew he was Jesus? He didn't introduce himself to you?
He did not say, hi, Mike, I'm Jesus. I always tell people that when when the Savior of the world looks at you and stands before you, you'll know who it is. But when his eyes looked into my eyes, he looked into my soul, and he knew me, and I knew him. I knew exactly who it was. So no introduction needed.
Yeah. And did you feel any remorse or guilt when he looked at you, or was it just love?
It was all love. Yeah, I've always described it kind of, like a rescue puppy. Because I have this little dog that we rescued from the pound. She's just so ugly. She's cute, but she loves us so much, and it's kind of like that kind of love, like you're an adopted kid that finally gets a home, and it was all love, absolutely no guilt. No.
And then what you saw with Jesus, you presume that was heaven?
I think so, yeah. So it's kind of funny because it took me a few days laying flat on my back to put this all together, because he said, I want to answer your prayer. Well, I remember as a kid, uh, my grandfather passed away when I was probably 5 years old, and I went to his funeral, and the priest is up there, and the priest says, uh, that your grandfather is in heaven. There's no more tears. There's no more pain. He's happy. He's seeing these beautiful things. And I remember thinking, wow, God, that sounds pretty cool. I'm 5 years old, so I'm just starting to learn about God and, the whole religion thing. And I remember asking him, hey, could you show me heaven? Because I'd really like to see it. And God made me with this mind of, I need to take apart the watch to see the gears and the springs to know how something works. So, asking me just to believe that there's this great place that now my grandfather's in, I was like, I need a little more than that. And that kind of became a nightly prayer of me as a little kid, you know, bless mom and dad and my sisters, and hey, can you show me heaven? And then
Wow.
the other thing I used to ask him too, like we watched the Charlie Brown Christmas special where Linus comes out on stage, he's holding his blanket and he says, the glory of the Lord shone all around me, quotes from Luke. And I remember thinking, the glory of the Lord, whoa, what's that look like? That must be really cool. This is God that made heaven and earth and everything that I interact with. I'd really like to see that too. And that kind of became another nightly prayer, like, show me heaven, and hey, by the way, could you show me glory? So he accomplished two prayer answers in one trip.
Yeah, so you think those are the prayers he was answering then,
I
was
think
your, like,
so, yeah.
lifelong prayer? Wow,
Yep,
that's so cool. A prayer you even forgot about yourself, so
exactly. Yep.
yeah. Oh, wow. What has reading your Bible been like since that experience? Has it become ultra real to you?
Yes. I that first year after the NDE, I carried around a little blue Bible that fit in my pocket because I didn't have the Bible on my phone back then. Um, but I used to take it out at lunch and start reading it. I read through the Bible in a year. I did the whole program where it tells you what pages to read. And I actually consider that one of the greatest accomplishments of my life is reading through the whole Bible. Not, I don't think many people can say that, and probably not many Christians can say they've read it cover to cover. I don't know, but it's funny because there's always something that hits me differently. Sometimes I'm like, okay, wow, I'm kind of going through that, or that relates to something that I'm going through, and it'll just put me at ease, or and other times it'll just get my mind going, and like I'll just start thinking, hey, you know what about this? How would so and so in the Bible handle this situation? So it's always relevant. It's so funny. It always just, there's always some relevancy somewhere to something that I'm going through.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a big part of my testimony is I grew up Christian, but only had read parts of the Bible. And then it was a little over 3 years ago, God put it on my heart to read the whole Bible. So I did the same thing, a yearly Bible reading plan. I did the Bible recap for anyone that's interested, and I still do that every year. And it's you read a section every day, and then there's a podcast that explains or goes more into depth on what you just read. And that has absolutely skyrocketed my faith, and how I
Yeah.
walk with God because I wasn't fully understanding, the whole storyline of the Bible. And you're right. I mean, his promise that it's living and active is so true. I mean, it just
Yeah.
jumps off the pages to me now, and it's so relevant to everything we're going through, no matter what we're going through in our lives. It's like,
Hmm.
I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. Yeah. And there's always something that you can always learn from something that you read. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What has your family's faith life been like since this? Did they believe you that you went to heaven and talked to Jesus right away, or has that evolved over time with telling them about your story?
they believed me completely. I mean, they weren't ones that I had to stop telling the second half to. They believed me, and they just thought it was amazing. I mean, all of my kids, when I told them, they were just bawling. But so was I. Yeah, and they're all their faith has grown tremendously too. They're all adults now, and they're all followers of Jesus, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, praise God. You said, God promised you'd reach millions. Do you think you've hit that point by now, reaching millions?
I absolutely have. I'd probably say, I mean, I used to go back and look at the counts on the podcast, and I think, wow, this is really resonating with people, but it's not about me. But I've done some radio shows, where sometimes you can't tell. I mean, YouTube, you can see counts. So I know I've reached probably 4 or 5 million on YouTube, and yeah, but There was one guy that interviewed me that has a radio show that is all over Europe. Um, I mean, I could touch every continent and just say, I've talked to Africa, I've talked to Brazil, Italy, England, Ireland. You know, all of that stuff has a reach. I had a magazine article written in Australia and New Zealand. Um, it's the biggest. I mean, there's no way to tell how many people read that, um, because there's no feedback, no way to really quantify it. Um, but it's one of the largest magazines in that part of the world. And so I'd say I've probably reached over 10 million. And I'm hoping that the new book that is at our publisher, I don't know when this will air, but the new book, I Held the Hand of Jesus in Heaven, will be available the first week of August, I hope. Um, and I'm just hoping that everybody can dive into that and, you know, hear the whole story. There's only so much that I can express on podcasts. A lot of the things that I'm feeling in the background and all that kind of stuff. That's what a book's for. So
Yeah, and I hope that people take this as an encouragement too to share your testimony no matter how big or small you think it is. Maybe we might not hear God tell us exactly how many people it's going to reach, but the ripple effects of it, I mean, we have no way to quantify that.
exactly. Yeah, like you said, the ripple effects. The only time you're going to find out all of that is standing with Jesus in heaven and just saying, okay, I'm ready. I want to hear what all had happened, and it could be generations from now too. You know, the internet's not going to go away, so you just never know who's gonna come across your testimony.
And yeah, hope that he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Those are the
Absolutely.
words that our
Yeah.
ultimate goal. Yeah.
Yep.
Anything else you'd like to share or closing thoughts with people as we wrap up here?
I used to say that it happened because I wasn't really looking around and seeing the beauty of his creation, and that changed me a lot. The NDE really opened my ears and to what God has to say, and I hear his voice all the time. I'll tell you a funny story that just happened a couple weeks ago. I'm doing this renovation in this house, and it was just before we had moved in, and the place was a mess. There's, my tools are laying around all over. There's stuff laying around. I mean, I'm doing something in every room, trying to hurry and get this house ready. And I had one screwdriver with me, and this was before my tools got there. We hadn't actually moved in yet, and I had one screwdriver, and I was so frustrated. I was up on the ladder doing something, and I needed a screwdriver. And I thought, gosh darn it, and I'm running around. I'm taking 15, 20 minutes looking through all the rooms looking for this one screwdriver. And I finally just cried out and I said, God, I need help finding this screwdriver. I really do. I'm just so frustrated. And I hear him say in an audible voice, it's in your truck. And this is how frustrated I was. I said, it's not in my truck, and I kind of hear him go, like, okay. So I thought, you know what? I'm just way too frustrated with this whole situation. I'm going to sit down and have lunch. It was lunchtime. So I pull out this sandwich from my lunchbox and I'm eating the sandwich. And as I'm taking a first bite, I get this vision of me standing on the ladder from yesterday using the screwdriver. And it's like I'm watching a movie, and I see myself using the screwdriver, fixing this lamp. And I took the screwdriver before I got down and I put it in my pocket, my pants pocket. And I thought, well, maybe it's in my pants pocket. Maybe that's why God's giving me this vision. How cool. Well, but he said it was in my truck. So I thought, well, I'm not going to go look in the truck. I know it's not there. But I thought, it's God. So I'll go look. So I go run out to the truck. I look, it's not there. I come back. The vision continues. So I see myself put it in my pocket. And then fast forward to when I went home, I sit down in my truck with the screwdriver in my pocket and it kind of pokes me. And I thought, shoot, I got to take that out of my pocket. Well, I didn't remember doing any of that. So I take the screwdriver out and I put it in my center console in my truck. And I'm watching myself do this like a movie. And then the movie stops, and I look and I go, oh my gosh, it's in my center console. I didn't look there. So I walk out to the truck and I open it up, center console, there's my screwdriver. And it's like, God told you it was there.
Yeah.
What, but I just didn't remember. I just had so much going
Mm,
on.
yeah.
And the lesson for me was, God doesn't want to just be part of the big important stuff. He wants to be in the little, the intimate moments of your life, the things that you think don't matter to him. And so I kind of broke down, and I just got on my knees and I folded my hands and I said, Lord, I'm so sorry that, I had that attitude with you. It was dumb, but thank you.
Wow. So much of that sort of thing has happened to me so much lately. And it's just over the last 6 months that I've had this knowing of, hey, ask God. And it's
Yeah.
pretty incredible like how quickly I find things, or I know what to do in a situation, as soon as I ask him, just simply asking him, it's like resolves a lot of issues.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to teach my kids too, like when that happens, don't forget to thank God. Don't forget to tell him, thank you, we found the TV remote. Like you're so happy
Yeah,
you
exactly.
found it. But
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, that's amazing. And I think you're so right. He wants to be in all the details of our
Yep.
lives.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mike, where can people connect with you or find out more about when your new book when it's coming out?
My website is mikemckinsey.com, and it's spelled Mike, obviously, McKinsey.com. They can find me there. There's my emails there, all my social media is there. So yeah. And I'll put a link on that website and my Facebook page. They can look me. I do a lot on Facebook now. So
Great.
um,
Well, I'll definitely link to that in the show notes as well, and link to all your social accounts too.
thank you.
Well, Mike, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing this story that I know you've shared a lot of times, but I know it'll be so encouraging to my audience and anyone who is hearing it for the first or even second or third time now. There's so much to gather from your story, and I appreciate you sharing it. And I pray that God blesses you and blesses your ministry. And thank you for what you do.
Oh, thanks, Natalie. I appreciate that. Thank you.